Well, one of the ways that we can gauge whether or not we're stressed is by watching how we react to surprises. When you have an unexpected change, do you have enough margin emotionally to absorb it, or do you blow your stack? I remember for me once, our first year of marriage for Donna and I, early in our marriage, we'd moved to a new town, and we were trying to get home once late at night, and we were out of gas. And so we went to a gas station in Dallas, and there was a long line to get gas. Very weird, not a normal thing, but suddenly we're finding ourselves in this queue for every single pump, waiting for gas, trying to get it, and I'm waiting, 4 cars. Finally, it's our turn to go, and as soon as I'm about to pull up, someone in an extremely expensive sports car just cuts right in front of me and gets out like, he runs this place and starts filling up his tank. And I remember I looked at him like, I don't believe it. And the next thing I know, I'm out of the car. And I'm on my way there, and then Donna jumps out of the car, and I assumed to back me up, like maybe he brought his wife with him, And, but she starts yelling at me, and she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, what? What am I doing? I'm about to give this dude a front end alignment, man. Like, you don't just come in front of me. And she's like, get back in this car. And so, like a good husband, I listen and I get in the car, and she's looking at me like I'm crazy. And she's like, what are you doing? I was like, well, look what he did. And she was like, it's gas. You're a Christian. You're a minister. You're in seminary right now. What are you doing? And I'm like, well, this guy. And so we let him go, get gas. And then we get home later that night, and I'm like, okay, yeah, that was kind of crazy. Like, what did I think was going to happen? Like he could have had some weapon. I could have gotten hurt. I could have hurt him and gotten arrested over gasoline. Like, this is stupid. Like, you just start thinking about all the scenarios. And I was like, what is going on with that? And so I just had to do a check-in with myself. Like what happened then? Like, I didn't go from 0 to 100 with that guy. Like, I was already simmering at like an 80. And I'm like, okay, this wasn't just about gas. And I just kind of had to look and go, man, I'm a brand new husband, moved into a brand new town. I don't have consistent work, and I'm in seminary. And I'm just like, I have all this stress, and just a little bit extra just put me over the top. And I think some of you know what that feels like. Now, I know some of you may not. You may just be like, I keep hearing about this stress thing. What is that, Ben? Some of you deal with that. But some of us understand the shortness of breath, the racing heart, the tension, headaches, and you know what it is to be stressed, and you go, how do you respond to that? And for some of us, we're already at a similar, and it doesn't take much to get you to a boil, and you can cascade into some very bad decisions with your body, physically, emotionally, relationally. We can do some damage to ourselves in the way we deal with stress, right? So we need to talk about it. And here's the thing. I don't want to start by talking about my stress or yours. I actually want to start by talking about Mary. Because there's several different ways to gauge stress. I don't know if you know this. When you're trying to judge people's stress, a classic is the Holmes-Ray chart. You kind of look at it, you remember this old chart, and you kind of put numbers next to it. And I was reading the Holmes-Ray chart, thinking about Mary, and you just kind of ascribe values to stress level. And I'm looking at Mary, and number 3 on the highest stress levels is marital separation from a mate, which if you remember, when Joseph found out she was pregnant and he wasn't the dad, he planned on divorcing her. So Mary's right there already. And then you go, marriage. Oh yeah, she got married, betrothed, but technically back then it was like a legal marriage, just with all the responsibility, none of the fun. Kind of a tough way to arrange that. And so you go, yeah, that was happening for her. Marital reconciliation with the mate. Yeah, that happened just a few months later when the angel came to Joseph and was like, stay with her, to work this out. And then you get down to number 12, pregnancy, and you go, dude, we're not even a third of the way through this chart. And Mary's posting record numbers. Like down at the bottom, like imminent threat of physical breakdown. And yet, when you run into Mary, she's not projecting that kind of stress. It's funny, we make fun of the song Silent Night, All is Calm, and you go, man, it wasn't a silent night. Like there's people everywhere. There wasn't a single room open in the inn, and she gave birth to a baby. That's not calm and bright. Like, what are you talking about? And you go, yeah, the externals were not silent, but her soul was. I mean, you watch Mary, and she has a supernatural calm throughout the infancy material. So as we're dealing with stress, we got to figure out what was going on with Mary because other people didn't handle it as well. I mean, we have 2 gospels that give you infancy accounts. You got Matthew that primarily follows the experience of Joseph, and then you got Luke that primarily follows the experience of Mary, and Luke does an interchange. he toggles back and forth between the announcement of the birth of John the Baptist and then the announcement of the birth of Jesus. The birth of John the Baptist, the birth of Jesus. He kind of moves back and forth between them both. And one of the reasons he does that is to show you superiority. That John the Baptist was the prophet to end all prophets. He was a great one. And Jesus was something greater in a category all his own. And yet as they do that, you watch, there's this contrast between when Gabriel, the angel, comes to Zechariah, John's dad, and tells him, hey, you're gonna have a boy, you've been barren, your wife can't have kids, you're old. But he comes to him, he's an older man, priest, in the temple, and there in that holy moment, Gabriel shows up and tells him, and Zechariah's response, isn't that great? Gabriel rocks in and was like, you're gonna have a boy named John. He's gonna lead the heart of the fathers back to the children. He's gonna prepare the way for the Most High. And Zechariah is like, well, how's that gonna work? Like, I'm old and Elizabeth's barren, like she's super old. And like there's this huge tonal shift. Gabriel's like, you're gonna have okay, you know what? I'm Gabriel, stand in the presence of God. And you know what? You're not gonna talk for 9 months, okay? We're gonna try that on. You're gonna be silent and think about what you just did, all right? And so, they end up having the kid, but it ends up kind of weird. Read it, it's there. But then Gabriel shows up at Mary's house, and Mary's maybe 14, 15, teenage girl. And the angel comes to her, you're about to have a kid. And it's even crazier. It's not barren, now you have a kid. It's never been with a man and gonna have a kid. That's even harder to get your head around. So she's like, how's that gonna work? And he says, well, the Most High is going to overshadow you, and you're going to bring forth the Messiah. And her response is, I'm his servant. Let it be according to his will. And you don't see her go like, oh my gosh, what's Joseph going to think? We're planning the wedding, and we already sent out the invitations. Like she's not stressed about the mechanics, but she's completely calm about what God is doing in her midst. And so we got to understand that. How do you have that kind of serenity in the midst of stress? How did Mary do it? What did Mary know? And you've heard the song, which frankly, I'm not a huge fan of, because there's all kinds of stuff in Christmas that kind of irritates me. Like when we sing In Excelsis Deo, anytime you sing that, I look at someone, I'm like, what does that mean? What does In Excelsis Deo mean? Like, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, then who are you singing it to? You're just telling God something in a foreign language? Like, you don't even know what it says. Tell everyone what it means so we can say what we mean. And then you look at Mary, did you know? And the song makes me crazy, because they're asking her this question. Mary, did you know that your baby boy would one day walk on water? And you're like, clearly she doesn't know. Like she didn't know she was pregnant. She wasn't clear on, look later. Like, did you know that you kiss the face of God? Like, no, she doesn't know that. Like, look later in Luke when the little boy Jesus gets lost, she doesn't come to him and go, deities, sometimes they run off. She says, why did you do this to us? She didn't fully understand who she was dealing with. And yet this song keeps hectoring her. Mary, did you know? And you're like, dude, do your research before an interview. Like, this is knowable information. She wasn't aware of a lot of this. Like every Jewish person at the time, there was revelation. Now, she got a whole lot more early on than most people did. And yet the full identity and purpose of Jesus unfolded to her over time, like many. And yet, she did know something. And she knew some things that gave her serenity in a day of stress. They gave her calm in the midst of chaos. And so we need to know what Mary knew. We need to feel like Mary felt. We need to have peace in the midst of our problems. All of us need that. And how can we get a glimpse into what was going on in her that allowed her to respond that way? When God says, I'm going to smash your plans, and she says, let it be according to your will. How do you respond like that? How does that instantly be what comes out of you? Well, we get a glimpse of her perspective in the song I read. She goes to visit her relative Elizabeth and sees that Elizabeth's pregnant with John the Baptist, and Elizabeth blesses her, and then Mary breaks into song. And her song is this heavy sampling of all this Old Testament poetry, that what's leaping out of her is the words of God she knew, and they've shaped her thinking. And so I want us to look at her thinking, and I want our thinking to be shaped alongside it. So you see it in verse 46. And 47, Mary says, my soul magnifies the Lord, my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. That magnified means it makes great, it celebrates, it extols. Rejoices means I delight and I celebrate. She's using the parallelism of Hebrew poetry because that's what she understood and knew. But notice in that moment, what happens. She doesn't do what Zechariah did. Well, wait a minute, what about this? And how am I going to do this? And what's Joseph going to think? She doesn't focus on her circumstances. She says, my soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. Isn't that wild? That her instinctual response is not to be absorbed with her circumstances. It's to be focused on the character of her God. And the fact that she can see God's character and not just her circumstances gives her calm in the midst of the chaos. That's the secret. It's the contemplation of majesty that is the solution to her anxiety. And so when we look at Mary here, she is fixed on not just what God's up to, but what God is like as he does what he does. Notice she focuses on the character of God, and that's what gives her calm in the midst of chaos. And we need this, incidentally. I read 2 articles yesterday that just came up in the news. One of them was from the Washington Post, and the headline was, Teen Brains Aged Faster Than Normal from Pandemic Stress. Which aged faster sounds good. You're like, yeah, grow up. But they quote Ian Gottlieb from Stanford University, and he says, aged similar to the way children who have faced chronic stress, trauma, neglect, or abuse. These adverse childhood experiences make people more vulnerable to depression, anxiety, addiction, and other mental illness, and can raise the risk of cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and other long-term negative outcomes. So they're saying the stressful experience we went through collectively has not been good for the youngest among us. And here we have a teenage Mary who's calm. We need to understand what she has. And if you're still not convinced, just by the way, The Guardian out of the UK had an article yesterday about how religious belief improves health across every single measurable category. They said the result of thousands of tests have indicated, each found that the measure of someone's religious commitment, such as how often they attended church, were consistently associated with a range of outcomes, including a lower risk of depression, anxiety, suicide, reduced cardiovascular disease, and death from cancer. So that's your in if you're trying to invite a relative to church. You just send them that article and say, I'm trying to save your life. Statistically, 5 to 10 years added if you just show up. Verse 48, she begins to tell us why she responds with that kind of celebration. Why the unexpected leads to celebration in Mary and not to stress. Verse 48, for he has looked on the humble estate of his servant. For behold, from now on, all generations will call me blessed. For he who is mighty has done great things for me, and holy is his name. Now, there's a lot in this celebration we won't get to, but I want you to see what she points out here. Number one, she says, why I'm celebrating is he sees me. He has looked on the humble estate of his servant. The Most High sees me. And by humble estate, she doesn't mean her character or a virtue. She means I'm poor. You find out later there were sacrifices you would bring when you had a kid, and there was a special kind of sacrifice of just some birds if you were really poor. That's what she brought because they were poor. And she's like, I am of low estate in society, and the Most High sees me. And when you understand that, the Mighty One sees me, there's a stabilizing to that. I remember one of the first things I ever got asked to speak at was this camp, and I said yes to it, even though I didn't even know that I was a speaker. I'm like, this guy might be making a huge mistake, but it's because the guy who ran the camp, I just respected so much. He just had this wonderful, non-anxious presence. The way he'd move through rooms was such an encourager. I just wanted to be around him. And I remember he had launched this camp. It was a new venture. It was a small business he and his wife were launching, and it turned out like people showed up, and there were all these kids in this room, but it was kind of a big deal. All these different churches had brought their youth groups, and so I was feeling anxiety for him, like you need to make a good impression. And he gets on stage, ready to introduce himself to everyone, and right as he does it, at the very top of the balcony, his little boy goes, hey, Dad, hey, Dad, hey, Dad, hey, Dad, hey, Dad, like starts yelling it over and over again. And I was like, no, somebody shut that kid up. I'm feeling all this, like, dude, you just literally swerved this thing into a ditch. And then we're all watching him. And in that moment, he was about to talk, and he gets interrupted by this. And do you know what he did? He stopped. He looked up at the balcony. He smiled really big, and he went, hey, son. And when he did that, his kid just smiled real big and sat back down. Didn't have a question. Didn't even have a concern. Just wanted to know his dad saw him. And as soon as he saw that his dad saw him, serene. And everyone in the room wanted to be around that man. They were like, I want a dad like that. Like, oh my, like what is happening? Nothing else he said about camp rules mattered. Because we saw there's something deep in us that wants that. The person with authority sees me. And there's a value to that. And that's the powerful mixture. If you're looking for a couple things, number two, that she puts together, not just that he sees me in my humble estate. She says, he who is mighty has done great things for me. Holy is his name. So he sees me and he stands apart. That's what holy means. He's something else. He's not like us. He's not someone that you got to question whether his character is going to be consistent. He's not someone who vacillates in his decision making. He's not like you. He's not like me. He's not like earthly dads who failed. There's an otherness to God. He's in a wholly different category. He's set apart and he sees me. And that combination is what's so powerful for many of us. The mighty one, that's the Old Testament word for a hero, a warrior who fights for the name of his people. She says, that guy, the one that stands apart sees me. We marvel at that. It's interesting, you see it in the news all the time. They'll be like, oh, the craziest thing happened. Keanu Reeves spotted at the airport. And a kid asked for an autograph and he gave it to him. And we're like, dude, that's so cool. I knew I loved Keanu Reeves. Or it was in the news the other day, went viral. The Rock bought a Snickers bar for a guy at a 7-Eleven. And you're like, dude, that guy, he's unbelievable. Wow. You and I sign stuff all the time. Nobody cares. You're buying your kids snacks all the time. They don't even thank you. Why do we do that? Because we know because they're in an otherness. They're in this other category, and they're not obligated. The reality that they lack obligation, that they don't derive value from you, and yet see you, it's mind-blowing. If you were to ask me in the mid to late 90s, who do you listen to nonstop? It's an easy question. David Crowder and Eddie Vedder, okay? Showing my age. Kids, Eddie Vedder leads a band called Pearl Jam, okay? It's a big deal back in the day. So it was crazy for me when I met Crowder later and then became friends with him. It was just like, this is wild. Like I'm friends with a guy that was the soundtrack to my wrestlings with God is now like a buddy who texts me. That's so cool. And then I found out that he had hung out with Eddie Vedder. And I was like mind blown. And so I asked him one day about it. I was like, dude, you met Eddie Vedder. Tell me about it. And he did. And I'll tell you because he just told it to a magazine, so I'm not like giving you secrets. But he was at a hotel, at this resort hotel on the beach, and he found out that Eddie Vedder was there. And Eddie Vedder's music had really inspired his, not in terms of lyrical content, but in terms of, but I can sing in the way I want to sing, and people will sing along. It doesn't have to fit into some sort of box in terms of lyrically or sonically. And he told his wife, like, hey, I heard Eddie Vedder's here. And she was like, yeah, you mean like right there? And he turns, and Eddie Vedder's like, right there. And he said he just freaked out and was like, ah! And wants to meet him, but doesn't know what to say. And so just walked past him into a room and was like, oh my gosh, Eddie Vedder's, and just kind of had a freak out, just freaked out. Finally, worked up the nerve to go talk to him. Said it was super awkward, not on Eddie's part, on his part. He said at one point he was like knelt down by him to talk to him. And it was like, what are you doing? And so he told Eddie, like, I was gonna ask for a photo, but I know you're with your family, just meeting you was great. And Eddie says to him, well, come find me tonight and we'll take a photo. He's like, oh, okay. Which he knew was polite for leave me alone now, right? So he left. Went to dinner that night, came back to the hotel, walking past the pool, and he sees Eddie Vedder across the pool, looking mad at him, going, like this. And he was like, what? And he was like, dude, where were you? Let's get our photo, man. What's the deal? He was like, on the phone, he's like, I gotta go. Eddie Vedder's yelling at me. He's on the phone. And he walks over to him, and they take their photo and then hang out for like 45 minutes. He's like, this is crazy. And then he saw that Eddie had a surfboard, and he was like, oh man, you surf, that's cool. I've never done it, but I'm gonna try it tomorrow morning. And Eddie says to him, 7:30. Excuse me? It's like, meet me on the beach. And he met him on the beach, and Eddie Vedder taught him how to surf. And then went out in the water with him and held the surfboard for him And as the first wave came along, he sent David along his first wave. And he's telling me this story, and I'm like, this is like so much better than what I imagined in my mind. And he said, yeah, I never forgot it. And now whenever someone is excited to meet me, I think about how Eddie treated me. I want to treat people that way. But what was so mind-blowing about it, it's set apart, sees me. That's so powerful, so stabilizing. And Mary looks and goes, God is inviting me into his story. Are there some inconveniences to this? Yes. Big talk coming with Joseph. Parents aren't really going to understand. But I'm not caught up in the particulars of the circumstances. I'm caught up in the character of a God who sees me and is writing a big story. And he's set apart. He's got different motivations than me. And yet, as I see the set apart one select me, I'm just thrilled to be a part of the story. I'm thrilled that he saw me. I'm thrilled that he knows me. I'm thrilled that he talks to me. And that's the same God that's dealing with you. The God of Abraham, God of Moses, God of David, that God wants a relationship with me. That God's moving towards me. That is the craziest thing, that I can have a conversation with the God who held Moses. That's mind-blowing. And you go, yes, that's what she's saying. And some of you go, well, no, she's not, Ben. She's saying how cool God is to her, which is great, but good for you, Mary, but it's not to me. But no, she moves on, and she says in verse 50, and his mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. She says, look, this isn't just about me. She says, he's done this to me, but he'll do this to anybody. In generations past, he did it, and in generations forward, he will do it. So Mary's saying, you can feel like this too. You can be a part of this, that you can wake up every day knowing the Most High sees me and invites me and cares about me. You can know the stability of understanding that the set-apart one sees you. That's available to you. And what she's saying is, he's always like this. This is consistent with his character. He's always treated his people this way. Does that mean he gives us everything that we want every time we want it? No. But it means he's good and he's faithful to those who fear him. And that word fear, we can get hung up on it. It's hard to translate the idea. It doesn't mean fear like terror, like I'm terrified of him. But so then we downplay it to respect, which for many of us, respect is too watered down. It's like the tip of a hat. It's not that. It's reverence. It's awe. Those who will stand in awe of him see a remedy to their anxiety, and they see an invitation to be a part of the story with the Almighty. That's unbelievable. That is mind-blowing. And that's what gets Mary skating right past the concerns of her circumstances, right into celebrating the character of her God. This is what he's like, not just for her, but for you. Then she starts talking about what he's like with us in 51, 52, and 53. We got 2 more points. She says, he has shown the strength of his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He's brought down the mighty from their thrones, has exalted those of humble estate. He has filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he sent away empty. Now, it's fascinating. She's like, he topples the proud and elevates the humble. And you're listening to that, and you're like, man, Mary just got aggressive. Like, what? No, an angel told you were pregnant. Like, what is this about? Like, he's toppling kingdoms and such. When did he do that? Well, he has done that in times past. He's not doing that right now. But she's speaking in a way, Paul does the same thing in Romans, that those he called, he justified. Those he justified, he glorified. The way God works, if he's made you right in Jesus, he will bring you to glory. And he says it in past tense, even though it's in the future, because it's a done deal. He's strong enough to pull it off. If he says he's going to do it, he's going to do it. And she looks and says, hey, the world is filled with injustice. The world is filled with pain. The world is filled with hurt. And God promised way back in Genesis, he would send the seed of the woman to crush the serpent's head. He promised Abraham that he would send the seed of Abraham who would be a blessing to the nations. He promised David that there would be a seed of David who would rule as a king with justice and mercy. And she sees all that and she was like, he's doing it. He's going to do it. Has it all come to pass yet? No, not necessarily yet, but it's as good as done. That God is going to come, and those who are arrogant and proud, and that's what she's talking about, the rich and those who are proud in the thoughts of their heart. Sometimes when we have too much material wealth, we think we don't need God. And so we close our heart to God and we close our heart to others. I'm not going to belabor that point. You're all going to watch Ebenezer Scrooge this holiday season, and Charlie Dickens is going to make that point for me, right? That you let the accumulation of possessions give you a cold, flinty heart. God's going to mess with your world right? And topple you. And yet those who are humble, he blesses. That's what he's like. So has all that come to pass now? But that is who he is. And so why Mary's celebrating here and not that concerned is because, yeah, she's got some issues to deal with, but she was like, but the one who's set apart sees me, and he is strong. He is strong. She says, with the strength of his arm, he will do what is right for me and for everyone else. And when you think about the strength of God, that's stabilizing in days of stress. I've told the story here before. When I was a youth pastor, early 20s, right out of college, I decided to take our kids on a mission trip. I'd heard that's what youth pastors did. I'd never had a youth pastor. It was like, oh yeah, you're supposed to go on mission trips. Took them to Venezuela. Never been to Venezuela. And so I was asking people, what do you need to know about Venezuela? What do I need to do? And I remember I just had one person tell me, well, what you need to do is look out for the monkeys. I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, there's just monkeys running around the streets. You gotta watch out for them, jumping out of trees, grabbing you. And I'm like, what? Okay, all right, look out for the monkeys. And they're like, oh yeah. And then someone else told me, we got a contact that's gonna meet us at the hotel, and he's gonna show us where to go. Like, all right. So I get there, and I've got these, little carload of minors with me in a foreign country. And I remember I show up at the hotel, and there's our contact. Oh, thank goodness. So we're gonna be okay. The person who knows the language, knows the country, right there. So I show up, get out. I was like, hey man, you're our contact? And he's like, yeah, I'm here. And right as I do that, this nice car pulls up, a guy jumps out, turns out it's one of his major donors. And so he sees two of us come up, talks to the donor for a second, looks at me and he goes, hey, y'all cool, you're here for a couple hours, I'll be back. Jumps in the nice car with the donor and drives off. And then it dawns on me, I'm alone in a foreign country where I don't speak the language with a group of minors that are in my charge. And stress filled my little 24-year-old heart. And I remember one of the kids looked at me and were like, was that our contact? What do we do? And I was like, you hold on, kids. Daddy's gonna deal with this, right? And I was like, give me a minute. And I left them on the street corner. And I went in this little room, freaked out. I forgot to tell you, on the taxi ride there, I had asked a guy driving around, I was like, where are all the monkeys? And he was like, monkeys? I was like, yeah, someone told me there are monkeys everywhere. He's like, there's no monkeys in Venezuela. I'm like, what? So my 2 pieces of intel had crumbled within minutes. So I show up in this room, and I just let it all, I just have a full freak out. I'm like, oh my God, I'm in a foreign country. I got these minors. There's no monkeys. There's no contact. I don't know what I'm doing. Oh God, this is a huge mistake. I'm a cautionary tale. And when I do all that, I just turn it into a prayer. Instead of just freaking out, I'm like, freaking out, Jesus, right? And as I do that, I see a tree. I'm just looking at this tree next to me. And the thought immediately jumps in my mind. This tree, maybe not this particular tree, but this dirt, this ground, this land has been here since before there was a Venezuela. Before that name, before those borders, before any of that, before that leadership, this place existed because God made it. And God rules over all of it. And then it struck me like, oh yeah, like I didn't bring Jesus with me to Venezuela. Like I had him in my pocket, He pops out like, so there's Venezuela, where's the monkeys? And I'm like, no, no, he rules over this place since before it was even called Venezuela. And he hears the prayer of every human being around me. And he knows their hearts, whether they acknowledge him or not. He is aware of every human being and their motive and intent, and he knows my name. And with the strength of his arm, he leads us and cares for us and sees us. And that didn't solve all my problems, but it stabilized me. Oh, the mighty one is aware. He knows me. And I was able to walk back out and just tell him, hey, we're gonna check into the hotel and get rooms and things that were, actually, it's not that dramatic an end of the story. I just functioned like a normal human. But the stress went away when I understood the strength of his arm. He shows his strength on behalf of his people, particularly those who come to him with humility, aren't so proud that I can deal with it. You give me enough money, you give me enough power, you give me enough know-how, I'll handle my life myself. How's that working for you? For many of us, that's what we're going for. And you got so much stress, it is tearing you apart inside. And you are turning to some beverages and unhealthy relationships and weird places that you look like oases, but actually are drawing away from you much more than they're putting into you. And he says, there is a strong one with a strong arm who leads those who are humble. And Mary celebrates him because he will fill us with good things. Why will he do it? Because we're so great? No, verse 54, she says, he has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy as he spoke to our fathers, to Abraham, and his offspring forever. He sees us. He's set apart. He is strong. And he sends forth steadfast love. Just knowing God's strong doesn't necessarily comfort you, because you could be his friend or his enemy. Just knowing somebody's strong is concerning. But she looks and says, no, but he has used that strength in service of his mercy. Mercy is kindness from a superior to an inferior. That's what mercy is. I know you are without the resources you need, and I'm coming towards you, not to squash you, but to lift you. That's the idea. In the Old Testament, it's the word hesed, steadfast love. I promise to love you. It's what he gave Abraham. Abraham was worshiping idols. Abraham was a mess of a human being. And God grabbed him and said, I choose you, and I love you. And I'm setting my love on you. I'm linking you up into my story, and I'm going to bless you. And after I bless you, you'll be a blessing. And that's the gospel. God says, my love is coming towards you to bless you. And when you receive it, when you believe it, that your love has come and it's blessing me, then you're going to be a blessing to other people. I promise you. And Mary looks and goes, he promised that long ago. And specifically, she's saying he promised us a seed of Abraham. So she knew this was the Messiah in her. This was the Holy One. Did she understand all the mechanics? She doesn't mention the suffering of Jesus, like Peter says, of his sufferings and the glories that would follow. She, like all of Israel, doesn't necessarily understand yet that he has to be the Lamb of God slain for the sins of his people before he is the conquering and triumphant Messiah. That will come later. Simeon will hint at it in the next chapter when he tells her that pain will come and a sword will pierce your heart as well. She had to cherish that in her heart. What does that mean? And like all of Israel, she understood that the Messiah stepped in and became the Lamb of God who took away our sin so he could move sin out of the way so that he could restore us to the heights of intimacy with the Almighty. But she understands the Most High sees me, and the Strong One has steadfast love for me. And so she may not understand all the particularities, but she trusts his heart, and she invites us to do the same. God is not elf on a shelf. I'm evaluating your good deeds, right? You've all heard that. The Santa Claus is coming to town. It's a creepy song. You know that. I mean, he sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows, like the whole thing. And then he puts a snitch in your house. And you're like, yay. You're like, no, this is weird, man. This whole operation is bizarre. God's not like that. He already knows you don't deserve grace. He knows the you behind corners and closed doors. He doesn't need an elf in there. He knows what you're up to. And yet he brings steadfast love anyway, because he knows I bless first and you become a blessing. I send forth my love and it fills you and flows out of you. And when you focus on the character of God like that, let me tell you, that's a remedy for chaos. So circling back where we begin, how can Mary respond the way she does to unforeseen circumstances? She looks and she sees, you know what, there are some difficulties associated with belonging to God. But all these stresses get right-sized when I look up at what my sovereign King is like. That he is strong and he is loving. That he is set apart, but he sees me. To close, I got to tell you, God made me live this one, church, yesterday. So, I've had this cough. I don't know if you caught it earlier, but you didn't catch it. I'm not contagious. I mean, are you aware? So I went to the doctor yesterday. I was like, I can't kick this thing. It's been a couple weeks. Let me go to this doctor and get some help. So I show up at a doctor, and while I'm in there with him, a nurse runs in and goes, here's the EKG, doc, and hands him an EKG, and he was like, this is serious. And I'm like, wait, is that mine? I didn't do an EKG. And he runs out of the room, and I'm like, whoa, what is going on? And I hear him saying, call 911. He's calling 911, and someone's leaving the office, and he's trying to get, so I'm just setting the context for you. Bedlam, life at stake, right? And inconvenient, because I was kind of hoping to get in and out, and now he's, saving somebody else's life. But I had been reading Jeremiah Burroughs' book, The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment. And it was talking about how the Christian is content. They have a sweet, quiet, inward disposition that trusts the disposal of God in all things, like Mary. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to be like that. And so I just waited while he did, whatever he was doing. And he came back in and he told me, you're the most patient I've had all day. And I was like, I know. I mean, I don't know that, but it makes sense. I'm reading Jeremiah Burroughs. And then he tells me, hey, you've clearly got some gunk in your lungs, but I don't know if it's pneumonia. I'm like, okay. And he said, I don't have an x-ray here. And he's like, so it could be pneumonia. And he's like, here's the thing, you're gonna have to go to an ER. And I'm like, an ER? Like, I thought you were gonna give me like a Z-Pack or something. And he was like, I don't know, man. Like you could need to be intubated. I'm like, intubated? What? And he was like, hey, you could die tomorrow. He was like, you don't need to go to the ER tomorrow. You don't need to go Monday. He said, you need to go right now. I don't know if it's cancer. The dude drops cancer on me. I was like, wait, what? And he just escalates this thing. And I leave the office and I was like, man, I had plans today. We were gonna go Christmas shopping with the kids. We were gonna go see those little Christmas boats go by. I had this whole day planned. And instead I'm gonna hang on the ER on a Saturday, which you know is gonna be jammed. And I was just like, man, I don't wanna do this. And I go to Donna, I'm like, hey, she's like, how'd it go? And I was like, well, he didn't give me a prescription. He told me to get an x-ray because I might be dying. It could be pneumonia, it could be cancer. And I don't really feel like going to the ER. And she's like, we gotta go. And I'm like, all right. So I go and spend like 4 or 5 hours sitting in the waiting room like I thought I would. And so I could rock the Burroughs calm inward disposition for about, I don't know, hour and a half. And I kept trying to like read a book, but I was tired and kept trying to work on the sermon. I was in a bad mood about it. And finally in a moment, like I'm trying to like, write a message to help you people. And then I just decided like, I'm like, God, like, ooh. I was like, I had plans today and they were all good. I was gonna work out and I was actually kind of looking forward to it for once. I was gonna take the kids to buy Christmas presents because I'm a good dad. I was gonna go look at these Christmas lights as a family and create a memory. And instead I'm stuck in this, I was just like, I'm so angry about it, just like mad about it. And I was like, what am I supposed to do about this? Because I'm supposed to write a sermon for y'all, and it wasn't going great. And I thought, well, let me ponder what I'm encouraging you to do. I'm telling you to do what Mary did when circumstances don't go your way, to focus on the character of God, which I know for some of you are like, sure. Like when life doesn't go my way, let me just focus on God's character. And I know it sounds silly, but I tried it. I just sat there and I was like, all right, let me try it, even though I'm really irritated. And I just started telling God that. I'm irritated because I don't know why you did this to me, and I don't like this, and I want it to be different, and I'm frustrated with you, and maybe under that I don't trust you. That's problematic, because I'm about to tell people to trust you. And so I start looking at this, and I'm like, he sees me. He's aware. He's aware I'm in this room, and he's aware of all of us. You are never for a second outside the providential will of God. You might be outside of his revealed will, making crazy decisions, but he never loses you on the radar. You're right where he wants you to be. Book of Acts says he's determined the exact times and places that you would live, if perhaps you'd seek him, because he's not far from any of you. So I'm like, God, you set me here, and you're set apart. So if I'm accusing you of having bad motives or tricking me, that's a deficiency on me, not you. You're not like that. So you're holy, and you're set apart, and you're good. You know more than I know. You see further than I see. So I don't know why I'm here. And I'm not gonna do that thing where like, maybe he would save me from a car wreck. Maybe if I were going to those boats, one of them would have caught fire. Like, I don't know that. I don't know that. I don't know. But what I know is you. And you're not giving me details, but you're giving me your character. And you're telling me to trust you. So you're set apart, and you see me. And you're strong, and you're using it to determine your steadfast love. You're writing a bigger story here. And I'm not gonna get hung up on little stressors and miss the big story. So God, whatever you wanna do, I wanna be a part of it. And so then I just asked him, I was like, Lord, I realized I haven't even prayed this yet. Could you please speed this along? I wanna go home now. And I prayed that, and then they called my name. And I went back there and I picked up a book that someone had bought me about margin, putting margin in your life. And it was talking about our relentless pursuit of progress has made us stressed and anxious and impatient. It wars against our soul. And I realized maybe that's why you wanted to sit me down for a couple hours, because I was trying to get you on my program rather than to stop and listen to yours. And I'm sitting in that room and I'm like, Lord, I want to have a calm presence before you. Knock on the door. Can I come in? Yeah. Doctor shows up. I'm gonna take your blood pressure. Okay. Pull my arm, look up, see the name tag. It's Dr. Christ. I'm not making that up. So I asked, I'm like, is that pronounced Christ? Christ. We ended up having a good talk about it. Turns out I'm not contagious. But at the end, she was like, have you considered taking Robitussin? I'm like, okay, go good. Well, all right, fine. So maybe this was just about perspective. Maybe it was just about having an illustration to close the sermon. Maybe it was the invitation to stop freaking out and blaming it on God and to replace that freak out with faith. Zechariah missed it. God had to sit him down for 9 months. Let's just think about it. I had to get sat down for about 4 or 5 hours. Maybe you just needed to sit here for about 35 minutes, maybe 40. It's hard to say. And maybe this is far enough for you to go, you know what? I'm stressing about all these little things and I'm missing the bigger story. And I don't want to miss it. There was a sovereign Lord who's writing a story with humanity, and you're a part of it. And you're beautiful in the image of God, but you're broken, friend, and you know it. And if you hold pride in your heart that closes your eyes to God and closes your heart to your fellow man, God will deal with you, and you'll be on the wrong side of that equation. But this is not the day of judgment. It's the day of mercy. And this strong God has mobilized his strength with steadfast love. And in doing that, he sees us and he has sent us his son to be perfect where we were not, to be among us because we needed him close. We needed the Holy One to walk among us, the majesty to condescend to a manger. We didn't just need him to be among us, we needed him to be poor. So even the poorest among us, even those of us who lack, could see he's like me. He stepped all the way into my circumstances to commiserate and to elevate, to bless all those who'd have faith in him. That's how this party started with Elizabeth. She said, blessed is the one who's believed in what the Lord is doing. And you're meant to be that too. Blessing can come this Christmas. How? The blessing of Christ comes to those who believe that the strong one has come in steadfast love. And he sees you. Do you know him? You're meant to. And you'll find stability in the midst of the stress when you link up with a God like that.